So this video is going to be a bit different, guys. In this video, I'm not going to be teaching you about behavioral economics or behavioral science. Instead, I'm going to be talking about my story, and it's the story of how I went from being a kid who found out about behavioral economics and thought it was really cool to now being able to say that I have my dream job in behavioral economics. And this is the story of how I got there despite almost quitting multiple times and having multiple setbacks along the way. Now, this video is going to be a lot longer than usual, but I hope that it can add a lot of value to your life, and whether you want to work in the field of behavioral economics or not, I hope that by hearing my story, you can feel inspired to pursue your passions and turn it into your full-time career. Okay, Chapter 1, High School. So my journey into behavioral economics starts when I'm 15 years old. I'm a pretty good student, I'm getting all A's and A stars in school, but I have no passion. I have no subject that I feel really strongly about and definitely have no clue what career I want to go down. This is probably a problem that a lot of you can relate to too. Finding your calling is one of the hardest questions we have to answer in life. So rather than just flounder around aimlessly, I try to seek some inspiration. And for me, the best source of inspiration out there was TED Talks. Yes, those TED Talks. I went through this weird phase in high school where I was binge watching TED Talks like they were Netflix series. I was probably consuming 3 to 4 hours of TED Talks every day. And during this time I was learning a lot of interesting things, but nothing really seemed to stick. Nothing really seemed to inspire me. That wasn't until I came across this TED Talk. It's called Are We Really in Control of Our Decisions? And it was given by Dan Ariely. And if you're invested in the world of behavioral science, you definitely know who Dan Ariely is. He's the author of Predictably Irrational. Now, Dan Ariely was this fascinating person. You know, he's burned on part of his face, he has this accent that I can't quite place, but it was the words that he spoke that got me so captivated. It was this idea of flawed human decision making in a systematic and measurable way. He talked about defaults and how you can use defaults to increase organ donation by 90%. He talked about the decoy effect and how if you bring a friend who's slightly uglier than yourself to the bar, this can actually make you seem much more attractive and make you more likely to land a date. These ideas were fascinating to me and spoke to me on a level that nothing else seemed to have done before. And so I went onto the TED search engine and searched for more behavioral economics talks. And at that time there weren't many TED Talks on behavioral economics, but there was another one on there and it was called Sweat the Small Stuff, and it was given by none other than Rory Sutherland. In this talk, Rory was talking about psychological solutions to human problems, and it completely changed the way I saw the world. It was this whole new way of thinking about how to solve society's problems, and it just lit a fire in my belly. Now, for the remainder of this story, I want you to remember these two names, Dan Ariely and Rory Sutherland, especially Rory Sutherland, because these people have had so much influence on my life, way more than they probably know themselves. So after I watch these TED Talks, I get really passionate about behavioral economics, and I start reading all the books I can about this subject. And I go to my parents and I'm super excited and I tell them, Mum, Dad, I think I know what I want to do in life. I want to be a behavioral economist. And my parents look at me with a blank look and they say, Peter, no one knows what behavioral economics is, but economics, that sounds good. You can be a banker like your Uncle John. So I think to myself, sure, I can study economics at university and work my way into behavioral economics that way. So I go to a new A-level college, different to my high school, and I knew that if I wanted to do economics at university, I'd have to study economics and maths. But then I asked my economics teacher, what else should I be studying if I want to do economics at uni? And she says, listen, the only way to get into a top university for economics is you have to study further maths. And I told her, I don't really want to do further maths. I find it quite difficult. I don't really get on with the maths teacher here. Do I have to do it? And she is insistent. And she tells me, if you want to get into a top university for economics, you have to do further maths. What follows during my A-level years are the worst 2 years of my life. There's a multitude of reasons as to why these 2 years were the most miserable of my life, but one of the main contributory factors was definitely the fact that I was really bad at further maths. I went from being one of the top students in my high school to suddenly being the bottom of the class in further maths, and it completely destroyed my self-esteem. I fell into a very deep depression, and just to explain how bad my mental health was at the time, one of the key signs of depression is a dysfunctional sleep cycle, and for much of my A-level years I was sleeping through school throughout the day and then trying to play catch up at night, trying to get notes off my friends. This was not a healthy way to go about doing your A-levels, and the worse I got at further maths, the more depressed I would get, and it was just this downward vicious spiral. Now, despite how down I was about my A-levels, I was still really enthusiastic about behavioral economics and still wanted wanted to go to a good economics university if I could. So with the help of my mum, I went to go see a whole bunch of universities on open day, and what I was really looking for on these open days was how much behavioral economics would I be able to do if I went here. Now, we went to see a whole bunch of different universities, but there's two experiences that stand out to me. The first is Oxford University. Yes, that Oxford University. Supposedly one of the best universities in the whole world. But when I went to the economics professor at Oxford and I said, "Hi, how much behavioral economics do you do here at Oxford?" He looked at me and he laughed and he goes, "Behavioral economics? No. Here at Oxford, we do real economics." It was safe to say that Oxford wasn't the place for me. I was never going to fit in a place that regarded behavioral economics as not real economics. But the other open day that stood out for the total opposite reason was Warwick University, where I ended up going. When I went on the open day to Warwick University and I went to the presentation given by the economics department, the atmosphere was completely different. In fact, they spent the majority of the presentation talking about behavioral economics and Richard Thaler and thinking fast and slow and Freakonomics, and they did all of this completely unprompted by me, and this just got me so excited. I knew from that one presentation that if I wanted to excel in behavioral economics, that Warwick University was the place that could help me get there. Now, this is where I made a kind of stupid decision, but I was so enthusiastic about going to Warwick University that I only applied for courses at Warwick University. I applied for pure economics at Warwick, but I also applied for another course called Economics and Global Sustainable Development, where half the degree would be pure economics and half the degree would be a mix of economics, sociology, politics, ecology, all with a focus on sustainable development. These were the two degrees I applied for, and both of them required 1 A star and 2 A's at A level. But by this point in the year, it was really too late for me to salvage my grades. I'd been failing at further maths for so long already, I'd put on an enormous amount of weight, my mental health was totally in the gutter, and sure enough, it showed through in my results. I managed to get an A in economics and an A in maths, but my further maths was not an A star, it was a C. Now, when I got these grades back, I was completely devastated. For as long as I could remember, I'd always been a top student at school, getting nothing but A's and A stars my whole life, but somehow over the last 2 years, I'd fallen so far off the rails that my grades had dropped all the way down to the C, and I'd completely ruined my chances of getting into a top university. Now, what I'm about to tell you is actually a bit of a secret, and it's incredibly scary for me to say this on the internet because I fear the judgment that might come back at me, but I only got into Warwick University through clearing. What I mean by that is that I didn't actually apply for the course that I ended up doing. I only got in because they had spare spaces on the course and they were kind enough to let me sit it despite my poor grades. Now, this is something which I find incredibly embarrassing. It's not something which I'm very proud of, and it's actually something which I've kept somewhat secret from even people who I was very close with at university, because there's a certain stigma, and understandably so, around people who get into top universities through clearing. You kind of feel like you don't belong there, you kind of feel like you don't deserve to be there compared to all the people around you who earned the grades that they needed to get into the university that you're in. So the course that was initially offered to me through clearing was Sociology and Global Sustainable Development, but I really didn't want to do sociology. I didn't really know anything about it, and it seemed too distant from behavioral economics to really be fulfilling for me. And so I asked the GSD department, is there anything else that you got that you could maybe give me? And they said, well, there's actually another course that we have a space on that you could do, and it's Psychology and GSD, Psychology and Global Sustainable Development. Now, when I heard that I could do psychology at Warwick, this got me really excited because, after all, Daniel Kahneman was a psychologist, not an economist, but he still is one of the founding fathers of behavioral economics. So that's what I did. I came to Warwick University and I studied psychology. And it turned out that this bad situation from having to get into Warwick through clearing ended up being a huge blessing to me, because as I studied psychology at Warwick, I totally fell in love with the subject. Now, the course was really hard at first because I never studied psychology before, unlike some of the other kids. And straight away they were talking about the amygdala and the dopaminergic system and action potentials and the hippocampus, and I had no idea what what any of these words meant, and I felt pretty lost when I first started. But with practice, with a lot of studying and with a lot of reading and paying attention and showing up to the lectures on time, I ended up actually getting pretty darn good at psychology. So much so that by the time I got to my third year, I was getting really high grades, especially in the modules that were more closely related to behavioral economics. Like, for example, I did a module called Behavior Change, where me and my friend Charlotte, I'm pretty sure, got the highest mark in the class for our nudge intervention. I think another reason why I worked so hard at my undergraduate degree was because I kind of had this feeling that I didn't deserve to be there, that because I only got into the university through clearing, unlike most of the people around me, that I really had to prove myself against my peers and work that much harder than everybody else to show that I do deserve to be there, just the same as them. And sure enough, after 3 years, I earned a very solid 2-1 in psychology and global sustainable development from the University of Warwick. You guys see that behind me? That is a degree in psychology. Something which I'm pretty sure Improvement Pill doesn't have. But during this whole time where I'm studying psychology and global sustainable development, there's something else that I'm doing at the same time that I need to tell you about, and that was my time at the Warwick Behavioural Insights team. Now, because I'd been to that open day earlier and I'd seen all of these people so enthusiastic about behavioural economics, when I arrived at Warwick, I was really desperate to try and find them. But for the vast majority of my first year at uni, these behavioural economists at Warwick were like mythical creatures. I couldn't find them anywhere, no one had even heard of them, and I found it really hard to get involved in anything behavioural economics related. That was until the summer of my first year, where one of my flatmates tells me, "Hey Pete, you're into behavioural economics, right? There's this event happening on campus organised by some master's students here. It's called the Warwick Behavioural Science Summit. Maybe you'd be interested in it." I was 100% interested in this event. This was one of the first inklings of behavioural science actually existing on campus, despite the enthusiasm of the economics professors in the open day presentation. Now, this just shows you how nerdy I am, but honestly, this Warwick Behavioural Science Summit was one of the best days of my life. For the first time, I felt like I'd found my people. There's this whole room full of people who were all enthusiastic about behavioral science just like me. The keynote speaker that day was Nina Mazar, who is actually a collaborator of Dan Ariely, that guy who got me into the field in the first place, who did that TED Talk. And it was so cool watching her say, yes, me and Dan did this project over in this part of the world, and this project in this part of the world, and we help people in this part of the world, all using behavioral science. It really opened my eyes to the world of possibility of a career in behavioral science. And one of the other speakers that day was Sam Tatum. And I already knew about Sam Tatum at this point because Sam Tatum was part of Rory Sutherland's team, the other guy who did the other TED Talk that got me interested in behavioral science. The speakers, who were just a few meters in front of me, were people who hung out with my childhood heroes on a regular basis. This event really gave me a new lease of life and reaffirmed my conviction of wanting to pursue a career in behavioral science. And so, because I'm having such a good time at this event, I try and find the organisers. And there's this guy called Rishabh who was in charge of organising the event. And I say, Rishabh, this event is amazing. Can you tell me more about your team and how can I get involved? I really want to get involved. And he looks at me kind of startled, like, who's this weird, first year kid coming to talk to me? But he's like, listen, it's actually really great that you've come to talk to me. We've been really struggling to recruit undergraduates into our team. Our team at the moment is all postgraduate students. But he says, if you want to get involved, take my contact and maybe you can get involved next year. So that's what I do. Next year I do get involved and I end up joining the Warwick Behavioural Insights team, and I am so happy to be part of this team. Just to be doing something in behavioural science alongside other people who are as enthusiastic as I am was an enormously rewarding experience, and it honestly made me so happy. So in my second year of university, I helped organise the second Warwick Behavioural Science Summit, and that's also where I met my now good friend Merla, who has been featured on this channel a couple of times. And so by the time it gets to the end of second year, it's time to organise a new leader to organise the next year's summit, and I put my name forward. And sure enough, I get it. I become the next head of the engagement unit of the Warwick Behavioural Insights team, and basically I'm in charge of organising next year's Warwick Behavioural Science Summit. So at this point you can see how in less than 3 years I went from barely scraping into Warwick University to now being head of the Warwick Behavioural Insights team and organising the biggest student-led behavioural science summit in the country. Now, leading this team was a pretty monumental task, but thankfully I had the help of my friend Merla to guide me through the process. Over the next year, we'd recruit a whole new team of behavioral science enthusiastic students and organize a whole series of talks and events. I even led many talks and workshops on campus to do with behavioral science, but ultimately the goal of my team that I was leading was to organize the next year's Behavioral Science Summit. Now, the Behavioral Science Summit in the second year was pretty good, but it didn't sell very well. And I think the problem was that nobody really knew the speakers that we got. We didn't have a big headline speaker to draw people in. And so I told my team, listen, this year we got to try and get a big name speaker to speak at our event. And so who do I suggest to be our headline speaker at the summit? Well, none other than Rory Sutherland. I told you to remember their names. Now, I honestly didn't expect Rory to say yes. He's an incredibly busy person. And I would have been totally understanding if he was like, listen, I don't have time to speak in your student summit. But because Rory Sutherland is such a generous guy, he said yes, and I was over the moon at this news. It was like all of the hard work that I and my team had been putting in throughout the year, and all of the vindication of me only getting into Warwick through clearing, it was all worth it to lead up to this point, because being here would allow me to meet and actually introduce on stage one of my childhood heroes, Rory Sutherland. And so because of all this, I honestly thought that this summit was going to be my moment, my chance to make my face and my name known in the behavioral science community, and maybe, if I'm really lucky, make a good impression on Rory Sutherland, or at least just get to meet him in person. But just as we're approaching the summit and I feel like I'm about to vindicate my decision of coming to Warwick, Coronavirus happens. The whole country is forced into lockdown. Merla, my team, and of course myself, we're absolutely devastated at this news. The whole country goes into lockdown and we're forced to cancel our summit. I felt like how I did at the end of A-levels. Like, this was my shot and here it was just being stripped away from me once again. But this time because of a matter that was completely out of my control, and honestly that really upset me. But I really didn't want to put all of my team's hard work to waste, and I still wanted to make something of all the organization that we'd done. And so my idea was, well, let's ask the speakers if they can film themselves do their presentation, and then we'll simply upload their talks to YouTube. I thought, well, at least if we put them on YouTube, then people can go watch them in their own time, and the whole thing wasn't a complete waste, even if it wasn't this epic live conference event that we were planning initially. And so my team liked this idea, and we proceeded to try and get the speakers to send us in videos of themselves giving their presentations at home. But bear in mind, this is the start of the coronavirus pandemic. Lots of people aren't yet proficient in filming themselves, of using their webcams and recording. So much so, in fact, that about half of our original speakers who agreed to come speak at our summit ended up pulling out from the whole thing entirely. But of the half of the speakers who remained, I couldn't believe it, Rory Sutherland still agreed to speak at our summit and record a video for us. So this is how I got in contact with Rory Sutherland myself. So after Rory sent me the video file, I sent him a very simple thank you email back saying, thank you so much for being the keynote speaker at our summit. I can't express how grateful we are for you to take the time to do this video for us. And then I said in the same email, by the way, I'm a huge fan of your book Alchemy and your podcast On Brand. Thank you for all the work that you do. Best wishes, Peter. And I fully expected that to be my last ever correspondence with Rory Sutherland. But to my enormous surprise, Rory replies to that email almost immediately saying, great, let's have a chat once Nudgestock is over. When I got this email, I couldn't believe it. Rory Sutherland, the guy who did that TED Talk that inspired me all of those years ago, is asking to have a chat with me one-on-one on Zoom. So sure enough, about a week after Nudgestock is over, Rory and I have a call. I don't think I've ever been more nervous for a phone call in my entire life. I must have sounded like a complete idiot on the phone. I was so darn nervous, I could barely put sentences together. And what made me even more nervous was that the first thing that Rory said to me was, "Hi Pete, remind me who you are again?" But I was very happy to explain to Rory that, hi Rory, I'm the guy who was organising that Warwick Behavioural Science Summit and you were our keynote speaker. And Rory said to me, actually, it's really great that you put the summit on YouTube. There's a real lack of behavioural science content on YouTube. And the fact that you put all these talks on YouTube is really helping to fill that space. He said Nudgestock is doing the same by uploading all the talks from Nudgestock onto YouTube too. So while we continue to talk about all manner of behavioural economics things for the next hour, that initial comment that Rory made, that there seems to be a lack of behavioural science content on YouTube, that really stuck with me. What's more is that at the end of our conversation, Rory said to me, stay in touch. Send me an email every 6 to 8 weeks to let me know what you're doing. And this really was the best outcome I could have hoped for. I was so happy that despite my summit being cancelled due to the coronavirus, that I had Rory telling me to stay in touch. Really the ideal outcome. So in the next week, thinking about my conversation with Rory and how he said that there's this lack of content on YouTube, I decide to start this YouTube channel, Pete's Bits. And I name it Pete's Bits because I already had a behavioral science Instagram called PJ's Bits, which is now called Pete's Bits Official. And that first video, Behavioral Economics Explained in 9 Minutes or Less, is just an adaptation of a talk that I've been giving at Warwick for over 2 years already. Now also, because of the coronavirus pandemic, there were very few companies hiring, period, let alone hiring behavioral scientists. So I decided to get more qualified and pursue my master's degree in behavioral and economic science, and Warwick very kindly gave me an offer to do so. And so that's what I've been doing over the last year. As you guys know, I've been making videos on this channel every single week while studying for my master's degree in behavioral and economic science. And now as the economy begins to open up, more behavioral science jobs are coming on the market. And so I applied for a whole bunch of different behavioral science jobs. My objective from the start of this story to the end has been the same, to make behavioral economics my career. But then there's a job opening at Ogilvy, which is Rory Sutherland's company. And it's for the position of consulting analyst. And so with most of my master's degree completed, and with so many of you guys subscribing to my channel, I thought, let's give it a go. So I apply for the position, I do the tasks, and they really like my submission. And next thing I know, I have an interview, they seem to like me in the interview, and a few days later I get the call that I've got the job. So this video is also an announcement video. I'm announcing that come this July, I'll be moving to London to join Ogilvy's behavioral science practice, co-founded by Rory Sutherland. It should be pretty obvious from this story why this is my first choice of company to work for. Rory Sutherland just seems to have had such a huge influence on my life, probably more than he even knows. And so I'm delighted to be joining the company. Now, if you made it this far in the video, thank you so much for sticking with the story. What I hope my story can show you is that whatever your goal is in life, there are probably multiple paths to achieve the same result. So don't hyper-focus on one pathway and then get discouraged if that pathway gets blocked off. Just try something else, keep trying, keep persisting, and hopefully something will work out for you in the end, in the same way it did for me. Thank you guys so much for watching. We'll have a regularly scheduled video this weekend. Alright, see you next time. Bye-bye.
It's huge delight that Peter's one of 3 people joining us. A hugely valuable addition to the team.